Hello, my dear 10th grade friends. Today we are going to visit the first chapter of science, which is the chemical reactions and equations. Now let's jump right into it. The topics of the chapter are chemical reactions, chemical equations, balancing chemical equations, types of chemical reactions, and ending with transitivity and corrosion. Now, what is a chemical reaction? A chemical reaction is a reaction between two reactants to form new products or new compounds. Then, what is a chemical equation? When the chemical reaction is written in the form of words or formulae, then it is known as a chemical equation. We can take an example of these. When carbon is burnt in the presence of oxygen, it produces carbon dioxide, right? This is a chemical reaction. But when this reaction is written in the form of words or formulae, this is a chemical equation. Now let's go to balancing chemical equations. We have three different types in balancing chemical equations. First is hit and trial method, second is coefficient method, and ending with LHS and RHS method. But why do we need to balance chemical equations? Well, I have four reasons. Firstly, it is important. Secondly, it can comprise up to 10 marks of a whole exam paper. And thirdly, you just can't write 2 plus 2 is equal to 4 for a 10-mark question. And last but not the least, you will oppose the law of conservation of mass. The law of conservation of mass states that mass can neither be created nor be destroyed in a chemical reaction, and thus balancing chemical equations is definitely a must. In the hit and trial method, we just need to look at it to balance the chemical equation, but this can only be working with smaller equations and not larger ones. In the coefficient method, we start by writing variables for all the compounds. Then we make simpler equations of all the elements as shown here. We should also count the number of atoms of each element too. Then we substitute a simple value for any variable and work our way up. Then we substitute all these values in the equation, and thus the equation is solved. In the LHS and RHS method, we start by writing the number of atoms of each element in both sides. Then we multiply it with the appropriate number to make it balanced. Then we write it in the equation, and thus this equation is also solved. We should also keep in mind that the number in the start as shown here counts for all the elements in the compound. Next we go to types of chemical reactions. There are 5 different types of chemical reactions: combination, displacement, double displacement, redox and decomposition. Combination reaction is the reaction where two reactants combine to form one single product. We can take the example of this as magnesium oxide, as it is formed by magnesium and oxygen. Displacement reaction is the reaction where a stronger attractive element displaces with the weaker attractive element. We can take a proper example of this as ferrous plus copper sulfate, which turns into copper plus ferrous sulfate. Here, ferrous is the stronger attractive element. Double displacement reaction is the reaction where two reactants exchange their places to form two new compounds. We can take the example of this as hydrochloric acid plus potassium hydroxide, which turns into potassium chloride plus water. Now, redox reaction has two different types: oxidation and reduction. Oxidation is the increase of oxygen and decrease of hydrogen, while reduction is the increase of hydrogen and decrease of oxygen. Now let's look at some examples of this. First is carbon dioxide, where carbon is getting oxidized. Thus, carbon is the oxidizing agent here. Another example is hydrogen sulfide plus bromine. Here bromine turns into hydrogen bromide. Thus, bromine is the reducing agent here. Decomposition reaction is the reaction where one reactant turns into two or more products. We can take the example of this as sodium hydroxide, which turns into sodium oxide plus water. Now let's end the chapter with rancidity and corrosion. Have you ever wondered why oily or fatty foods get spoiled for no reason at all? Gee. This is because they are getting rancid or rancidity. The process of fatty or oily containing foods getting spoiled due to the exposure to oxygen is known as rancidity. Good examples are pickles or chips. Now, corrosion is the process of metals getting rusted due to the exposure to oxygen. A good example is rusting of iron or rusting of silver, etc. And with this, we completed the whole chapter.